Growing up without a father felt like walking through life with one shoe on, always unbalanced, always missing something. I was born in a small town in Ohio, and as far back as I can remember, my mom never once mentioned my dad. His name was barely whispered in our house, as if saying it out loud would summon some kind of darkness she didn't want to face. When I was younger, I thought it was normal, just the two of us, me and mom. But as I got older, I started noticing how different my life was from other kids. At school events, when classmates would run into their father's arms after a recital or a sports game, I'd scan the crowd for a face I didn't even know. My mom would always be there, arms crossed tightly, clapping stiffly, smiling with her lips but never with her eyes. She was present, yes, but not warm, not open, and definitely not willing to talk about my father. I asked her once when I was about 8 years old. We were sitting on the porch swing, eating cherry popsicles. I'd worked up the courage for weeks. "Mom," I said slowly, "did my dad ever love me?" She stiffened instantly. Her eyes flicked toward me, cold and unreadable. Then she looked away, out into the yard, where the grass was too long and the mailbox leaned to one side. "He left when you were a baby," she said curtly. "He made his choice. That's all you need to know." I didn't ask again after that. But the emptiness lingered. In high school, it became a constant ache. I'd lie awake at night wondering what he looked like, what his voice sounded like, if he had the same eyes as me. I'd stare at my reflection, searching for pieces of him in the shape of my nose, the angle of my jaw. My mom had always been vague, almost mechanical when it came to answering anything about him. Her go-to line was, "He didn't want to be a father." He walked out and never looked back. Over the years, I swallowed that version of the story like bitter medicine. It shaped me, made me guarded, made me afraid to trust men, made me feel like maybe I wasn't lovable enough for even my own dad to stay. By the time I was 17, I had learned not to ask questions. But I hadn't stopped wondering. My mom, a nurse at the local clinic, worked long hours and kept a tight leash on our life. She was one of those women who was always busy, always tired, always avoiding emotional conversations. Our house was clean but cold. Her hugs were brief, her praise rare. Still, I tried to be a good daughter. I made honor roll, didn't sneak out, didn't date much, and helped with groceries without being asked. But inside, I was constantly screaming for something I couldn't name. Then one rainy Saturday afternoon, everything changed. We were cleaning out the basement together. Well, more like, I was cleaning it out while she supervised from the top of the stairs, sipping her coffee and occasionally barking out what to keep and what to toss. Most of the boxes were full of old Christmas decorations, tax paperwork, and faded photo albums from before I was born. I was digging through a dusty stack of old moving boxes when I found one shoved way in the back, under an old sheet and a broken table lamp. It was different from the others, smaller, taped up sloppily, and labeled only with one word in black Sharpie, David. I froze. David. That was my dad's name. I knew it from my birth certificate, though my mom had once threatened to shred the thing if she caught me looking at it again. "Hey, Mom," I called up, my voice shaking slightly. "What's this box labeled David?" Silence. Then a sharp edge entered her voice. "Just toss it. It's nothing." "But," I said, "toss it." Her words sliced through the air like a warning bell. But something inside me told me not to listen. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the years of unanswered questions boiling up to the surface. Maybe it was just plain stubbornness. Either way, I waited until I heard her footsteps retreat to the kitchen, then I opened the box. Inside were stacks of letters, bound by rubber bands that had long since cracked and fallen away. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, of envelopes, all addressed to the same person, me. My heart thudded in my chest as I picked one up. The handwriting was slanted and neat with little loops at the ends of each letter. The return address was a name I didn't recognize, but the first line read, "To my beautiful daughter, Emma." I blinked. I was Emma. I fumbled to open the envelope. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly smudged, but the words were still legible. Dear Ma, I know you probably won't get this letter. Your mom might never give it to you. But I have to try. I miss you more than words can say. I think about you every single day. I know I wasn't there when you were born, and I'm sorry for that. But it wasn't by choice. Please believe that someday, when you're old enough, you'll know the truth. Love always. Dad. I stared at the paper until the words blurred through my tears. My hands trembled as I pulled out another letter, then another. Some had dates. Some had tiny drawings in the margins, of stars, of hearts, of little animals. One even had a picture of a teddy bear captioned, "Do you still sleep with one?" Each letter was raw, emotional, desperate, and none of them matched the story I'd been told. My mom had said he walked out. These letters said he never stopped trying to come back. I sat there for over an hour, surrounded by a sea of letters from a man I never knew, but who clearly loved me more than I had ever been allowed to believe. My fingers were stained with dust and tears as I read about the court battles he'd fought, the birthdays he missed, the gifts that were returned unopened. One line haunted me from a letter dated when I was 5. I sent you a stuffed bunny for your birthday. I hope you got it. If not, just know I tried. I'll never stop trying. I never got a bunny. I didn't even have a party that year. I couldn't breathe. The sound of footsteps on the basement stairs snapped me out of my trance. My mom was coming back. I scrambled to shove the letters back into the box, but I didn't move fast enough. She reached the bottom step just as I was clutching the top envelope. Her face went pale. "What are you doing?" she said, voice low and cold. I stood up, fist clenched. "You lied to me." For a long second, neither of us moved. The only sound was the hum of the old dehumidifier in the corner. My mom stood there, frozen at the base of the stairs, eyes locked on the letter in my hand as if it were a weapon. And maybe to her, it was. "You lied," I repeated, louder this time. My voice cracked with emotion, but I didn't care. I held up the envelope like proof in a courtroom. "You told me he left. You said he didn't want me. But these letters, he wrote to me. He never stopped writing to me. Why would you hide them? Why would you keep them from me?" She opened her mouth, then shut it. Her face flushed, but not with embarrassment, more like panic. She stepped down into the basement, each footfall deliberate and slow. For the first time in my life, I saw something unfamiliar in her eyes. Fear. "I did what I had to do," she said finally, her voice tight. "No," I snapped. "You did what you wanted to do. You stole my father from me." Her lips twitched. "Don't talk to me like that, Emma. You don't know what it was like. I don't know because you never told me. You just fed me a version of the story that made you look like the victim and him the villain. And I believed you. I hated him because of you." She glanced at the open box, her jaw clenching. "Those letters weren't supposed to be found." "Yeah, no kidding," I said bitterly. "So what? You kept every single one just to hide them better?" She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned against a shelf, sighing like the weight of everything was finally settling on her shoulders. She looked older in that moment, more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "You want the truth?" she said after a long silence. "Fine. Here it is. Your father and I, David, we were a disaster. We fought all the time, even when I was pregnant. He wanted to move to another state for a job offer, and I didn't want to leave. He accused me of holding him back. I accused him of not caring about the baby. It got ugly. I stayed silent, but I didn't let go of the letters. He left 3 weeks before you were born," she continued, staring at a crack in the cement floor. "Just packed a bag and left. Didn't even say goodbye. And yes, at first, I thought he was gone for good. I was angry, hurt, alone. But then he came back, didn't he?" I pressed. "He tried to be in my life." Her eyes darted to the box. "He did. For a while. He called. He wrote. He even tried to show up at your first birthday." "What happened?" I asked. though deep down I already knew. I told him to leave, she said quietly. I told him if he loved you, he'd let you have a peaceful life. Without him. I didn't want you to grow up with broken promises and disappointment every other weekend. I didn't trust him to be consistent. And she hesitated. I didn't want to share you. There it was. The truth, raw and selfish. I felt something twist in my stomach. So you decided for both of us, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. You didn't even give him a chance. I gave him years of chances before you were born, she snapped, suddenly defensive again. He was unreliable, immature, always chasing some new idea or job or fantasy life. I couldn't gamble your childhood on a man like that. But he changed, I said, my voice rising again. He tried. He wrote me every year. He fought to see me. You didn't just cut him out. You erased him. My mom looked down, silent again. I needed him, I said, my throat tightening. All those years when I felt unwanted, unloved, you could have stopped that. You could have told me he cared. But you didn't. Why? Because you were afraid I'd love him more than you? She flinched. And then, for the first time in my life, she said something I never expected to hear. Yes. My breath caught in my throat. I was afraid you'd run to him and never look back, she whispered. I was afraid he'd win. That you'd see how charming he could be and you'd forget how much I sacrificed. Tears stung my eyes. But that wasn't your choice to make. I know, she said, and her voice finally cracked. I know. And I'm sorry. For a moment, we just stood there, two women, mother and daughter, both broken in different ways by the same man. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw something. But all I could do was pick up the letters and hug them to my chest like a lifeline. I need to find him, I said finally. Her eyes widened. Emma, he might not even be the same person anymore. I don't care. I need answers. I need him. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded slowly. Then I'll help you, she said. If you really want to find him, I'll give you everything I know. Old addresses. Phone numbers. Even the court records. I didn't say thank you. I couldn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with the box of letters still beside me on the bed. I hadn't slept much. I had spent most of the night rereading every single envelope, trying to piece together a timeline, a picture, a personality. My dad, David, wasn't just some vague shadow anymore. He was real. He had thoughts, feelings, hopes. He had missed me. He had fought for me. And now, I had to find him. True to her word, my mom left a manila folder on the kitchen table before she left for her morning shift. Scribbled on the front in thick black pen were the words, David, a last known info. Inside were court documents, child support filings, an old driver's license copy, a couple of letters returned to sender, and a printout from some outdated online directory. Most of it was over 10 years old. The last known address was in Pennsylvania, 3 states away. But I didn't care. It was something. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my best friend, not my aunt, not my teachers. I kept it close, sacred. This wasn't just a mission. It was a part of me I was reclaiming. I used every tool I could find. I Googled him, searched Facebook, LinkedIn, even Reddit. I checked old newspaper archives and obituaries, just to rule out the worst-case scenario. For days, it felt like I was chasing smoke. The name David Harper brought up hundreds of results, most of them dead ends. But then I found a post. It was on a forum for single fathers from years ago. A man named David Harper had written a thread titled, To the daughter I lost, maybe someday you'll find this. My heart stopped. It was dated almost a decade ago. I clicked. I don't know if you'll ever read this, Emma. But your birthday's coming up, and I can't stop thinking about you. You're probably 12 now. I wonder if you still have that tiny dimple in your chin like you did when you were a baby. I wonder if you're taller than your mom. If you like art or music or soccer. I've missed everything. I wish I could go back. I wish your mom would have let me be part of your life. I wrote you letters for years. Maybe someday you'll find them. Maybe someday you'll want to find me too. I'll always be here if you do. Underneath, someone had replied years later, saying, "Hope you two find each other someday, man." No other updates. No contact info. But it was him. It had to be. The mention of my name, the letters, the age, it all lined up. It gave me chills. I took a chance and made an account, replying even though the thread was ancient. "I'm Emma. I think I'm your daughter." I didn't expect anything to happen. I figured the account was long abandoned. But less than 48 hours later, I got a message. "Emma. Oh my God. Is it really you?" I stared at the screen, barely able to breathe. "I've waited so long for this," he wrote. We messaged back and forth for hours. He told me everything. How my mom had blocked his phone number, returned every letter and gift, moved without telling him where. How he had tried to fight in court but ran out of money. How he'd written letters anyway, hoping maybe one day I'd read them. How he never stopped thinking about me, even when life moved on and he remarried. Wait, remarried? I froze at that part. "You have a new family?" I typed, my stomach nodding. "Not anymore," he replied. "We divorced a few years ago. No kids. Just me now." I moved back to Pennsylvania to be closer to my parents before they passed. I exhaled, not even realizing I'd been holding my breath. "I want to see you," he said. "If you're ready." I didn't hesitate. "I am." We made plans. He lived in a town called Carlisle, about a 5-hour drive from me. I told my mom I was visiting a friend for the weekend, and for the first time in my life, I lied to her. She didn't ask many questions, probably out of guilt. Part of me felt bad, but another part of me felt entitled to this moment. The drive was surreal. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual. Every mile closer felt like I was shedding a layer of confusion, of resentment, of pain. And yet, fear clung to me too. What if he didn't live up to the letters? What if we didn't connect? What if this made everything worse? When I finally pulled into the little diner we agreed to meet at, I saw him standing outside by the door, clutching a worn blue baseball cap in his hands. He looked older than I imagined, grayer, more tired, but his eyes lit up the second he saw me. We just stared at each other for a moment. Then I stepped forward, and he opened his arms. I fell into them. And for the first time in my life, I felt something that had been missing for so long, complete. He held me tight, like he was afraid I might disappear. "I can't believe it's really you," he whispered into my hair. "You look just like your mom, but you've got my eyes." We sat inside the diner for hours, drinking coffee neither of us touched. He showed me pictures of his old house, his dog, the car he'd fixed up when I was little, thinking someday he'd teach me to drive it. He pulled out a crumpled photo from his wallet of me as a baby, said he carried it everywhere. I told him everything, about my childhood, the years I felt invisible, the hurt, the confusion, the dreams I had. He listened like every word mattered. He teared up when I told him about finding the box of letters. Said he thought they were lost forever. "I wrote you every year," he said. "Birthdays, Christmas, the first day of school. I even sent you a diary once, hoping maybe you'd write back." I nodded. "I never got any of it." "She kept them all." He nodded too, eyes full of pain. I figured, but I had to try. We spent the whole day talking, laughing sometimes, crying a lot. It felt natural, but surreal, like catching up with someone from a dream. When I finally had to leave, we stood in the parking lot for a long time, not ready to say goodbye. "I want to be part of your life," he said. "However you'll let me." I hugged him again. "I want that too." Driving back home, I felt lighter. like a door had opened somewhere inside me, one I didn't even know I'd been pounding on my whole life. I wasn't just the girl whose dad left. I was the girl whose dad tried. When I got back home Sunday night, the house felt different. Not physically, everything was exactly where I'd left it, but emotionally. The air between my mom and me had shifted. I could sense her waiting for something, maybe an explosion, maybe forgiveness. She didn't ask me how my weekend went. I didn't offer it either. We passed each other in the kitchen like strangers. But I wasn't the same girl who had left 2 days ago. Something inside me had changed. I had finally looked my pain in the eye, named it, and given it a face my father's. And now that I knew the truth, I couldn't pretend anymore. That night, after dinner, I sat on the living room couch, clutching my phone, scrolling through the selfies David and I had taken at the diner. It still felt surreal. He was real. He was smiling. And he had looked at me like I was the most important person in the world. Not a burden. Not a memory. His daughter. My mom peeked her head in from the kitchen doorway. "You okay?" I nodded, but then added, "Can we talk?" She hesitated, then walked over slowly and sat across from me. I didn't waste time. I saw him. This weekend. I met Dad. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. He was everything I imagined and more, I said. He remembered my birthdays. He carried a picture of me around for 18 years. He wrote me letters you never gave me. He tried, Mom. She looked down, eyes filling with tears. I know you were hurt. I know he made mistakes. But so did you. You took away my choice. You rewrote the narrative to protect yourself, and you thought I'd never find out. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I was scared. I thought I was doing what was best. I know, I said softly. But the truth always comes out. And now I have to figure out how to live with both versions, your version and his. We sat in silence for a long while. The TV murmured in the background, but neither of us paid attention to it. Finally, she whispered, "Do you hate me?" The question pierced through me. "I don't," I said truthfully. "But I'm angry. I think I'll be angry for a while. Not because you didn't love me, but because you didn't trust me to love both of you." She nodded slowly, wiping her cheeks. "I deserve that. I don't want to lose you," I added. I want to have a full picture of who I am. And that means having him in my life too." She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like years. And I could tell, in her eyes, that something was breaking open inside her too. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was understanding. Maybe both. "I'm sorry, Emma," she whispered. "Truly, I can't change what I did. But if you want him in your life, I won't stand in the way anymore." I nodded, and for the first time in days, I felt the sting in my chest begin to ease. Over the next few weeks, David and I talked every day. Sometimes on video calls, sometimes texting late into the night. He sent me more letters he'd copied for himself, stories about my childhood from his side of the glass. He told me how he used to drive past my elementary school sometimes, just to feel closer. How he once followed our old minivan through town, afraid to say hello, just to see if I looked happy. He even told me about the night he sat outside our house for hours with a birthday gift on the passenger seat, only to drive away because he didn't want to cause a scene. It shattered me and healed me all at once. I told him about my art projects in middle school, the panic attacks I had before tests, the time I sprained my ankle at soccer tryouts. He laughed at my stories like he'd been there. He listened like he was catching up on years of missed broadcasts. Then one night, he asked something that stopped me cold. "Would you want to meet your grandparents?" he asked. "They're gone now, but I could take you to the old house. The one I grew up in. Show you your roots." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because it hit me just how much I'd missed. How many people I'd never met. How many memories I'd never made. But I said yes. And a week later, I drove back to Carlisle, this time with my mom's blessing. The house was old and a little rundown, tucked between rows of maple trees and rusted fences. But it had a charm to it. The porch still creaked, and the wind chimes hanging by the door whispered in the breeze like ghosts welcoming me home. David walked me through each room, pointing to childhood photos, faded wallpaper, and the corner where he and his brother used to race matchbox cars. He showed me the backyard swing that his dad built by hand, the attic where he used to sneak off to write music. In the dining room, he paused at a worn oak table. "This was where I wrote most of the letters," he said quietly. "Right here. I used to light a candle, pour a cup of coffee, and just talk to you on paper." My throat tightened. "Sometimes I'd pretend you were sitting across from me," he added, smiling sadly. "Just listening." I sat down in the chair he pointed to. "I'm listening now," I said. He sat across from me, and for the next hour, we filled that room with the sound of us, the us that had been buried for too long under layers of silence, secrets, and shame. He told me about the woman he'd married after my mom, how she'd been kind, but how he'd never stopped carrying the weight of what he lost. I told him about my plans for college, how I wanted to study journalism because I had always been obsessed with stories, real ones, true ones. Maybe because I'd grown up in the middle of a lie. "You're brave," he said. "Braver than I ever was." I looked at him. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of running from the truth. Before I left, we stood outside in the fading light. He handed me a small wooden box. Inside were all the returned letters, neatly bundled and tied with string. My name written over and over in different handwriting styles, childlike to mature, as he tried to guess what age I was when I'd read them. "I want you to have them," he said. "They're yours." They always were. I hugged him, tighter this time. No fear. No hesitation. "I'm glad I found you," I whispered. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. "You didn't just find me," he said. "You rescued me." And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just filling a void in my own life. I was healing a wound in his too. We weren't just rebuilding a relationship, we were rebuilding ourselves. 3 months later, I was standing in the middle of my high school gym, dressed in a navy blue gown with a gold tassel hanging from my cap, holding a diploma in one hand and a future I finally understood in the other. Graduation day. My mom sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She had been quiet and supportive these past few months, never asking questions about my visits with David, but never standing in the way either. We were still figuring each other out, still stitching together trust where it had once torn. And David. He was there too, sitting 2 rows behind her. They hadn't spoken, not yet, but they both came. They both showed up. For me. As I stood on stage with the rest of the class, I scanned the crowd and saw him. My father. His camera pointed at me, his face beaming like I was the center of the universe. I blinked hard to keep from crying. This moment was ours. After the ceremony, as the crowd poured into the school courtyard, I found him near the parking lot. He pulled me into a hug the second he saw me. "You did it," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Dad," I whispered. Calling him Dad still felt new, but it was real. Earned. Deserved. We stood there for a moment, and then something happened I never expected. My mom walked up. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her mouth was tight, like she wasn't sure if she was about to cry or scream. But she nodded to him. "Hi, David," she said quietly. He straightened a little, stunned. "Hi. I know we have a lot of history," she said, voice careful. "But thank you for coming. She needed you." He swallowed hard. "She's incredible. You did a good job raising her." I stepped between them and took both of their hands. It felt symbolic, like I was closing the loop on a story that had lived in shadows for far too long. "Can we take a photo?" I asked. They both nodded. My best friend snapped the picture. The 3 of us, awkwardly positioned but smiling. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that was enough. That summer, I started working at the local paper as an intern, writing obituaries, covering parades, editing community announcements. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. Every person I interviewed, every story I wrote, felt like another step toward understanding the world and myself. I also started writing something personal, a feature essay I never intended to publish, at least not yet. It was called The Letters in the Basement. It was raw, unfiltered, a reflection of everything I had learned about family, about truth, about the danger of a single narrative. It began with a girl cleaning out a dusty basement and ended with a reunion 18 years in the making. I wrote about how betrayal and love can coexist, how forgiveness is rarely clean, and how sometimes the people who hurt you also carry the deepest regrets. I wrote about my mom, and I wrote about my dad, not as villains or heroes, but as humans. When I showed it to David, he cried. Then he hugged me and said, I wish I could show this to my younger self, the one who thought he'd lost you forever. When I showed it to my mom, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, it's beautiful and brave, just like you. Later that summer, David invited me to his house for a family barbecue. I met his wife, Elaine, a warm, bubbly woman who made the best potato salad I'd ever tasted, and his stepson, Tyler, who was close to my age. At first, I felt like a guest in someone else's story. But as the sun went down and the fireflies came out, something softened inside me. Elaine leaned over at one point and said, you were always part of his heart, even before you walked through that diner door. I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I believed it. But healing doesn't mean forgetting, and forgiveness doesn't mean the past disappears. There were still hard days. Moments when I'd read one of his old letters and feel the ache of what we lost. Times when my mom would walk into the room while I was on the phone with him and we'd both tense, still haunted by old scars. But little by little, we found a rhythm. My mom started asking questions about him, not in a jealous or angry way, but with curiosity. I told her stories he'd shared from my childhood, and she filled in the gaps with her own. They weren't rewriting history anymore. They were coexisting in the truth, and I was finally living in it. A week before I left for college, David gave me one last letter. But this time it wasn't old. It was new. The envelope was crisp, the ink still fresh. I opened it in my dorm room the night I moved in. It read, Emma, you are the bravest person I've ever known. Not because you found me, but because you chose to see me, not as the version you were told, but as the man I truly am. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. You've given me something I thought I lost forever, my daughter. Thank you for letting me be part of your story again. I love you. Always. Dad. I sat on the edge of my new bed, the campus bustling outside my window, and let the tears fall freely. He was mine, and I was his. Still. Always. The truth had broken something in me, but it had also rebuilt something even stronger. I didn't grow up with the father I always dreamed of, but I found him. And in doing so, I found myself. The letters in the basement were just the beginning. The rest of my story? I was finally ready to write it.